Jewish life in Baghdad prior to World War II. And I'm going to read you I was well prepared, and then my phone goes berserk. So rather than wasting any more time, we'll just bring Ron up here.
Hello there. The book is here, Memories of Eden. It's available on Amazon. It was, as Iris said, written by my great aunt. I never met, sadly. I'm going to do the same and read from my phone. Jerry Seinfeld said, "Fear of speaking beats fear of death." That means if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be the guy in the box than the guy doing the eulogy. Susan told me that. After I agreed to talk about the book written by my great aunt, and here it is, called Memories of Eden. It tells a story of a time when relations between Jews and Muslims were much different than today. They lived in relative peace and harmony. My family came from Baghdad, Iraq. The Iraqi Jews are the original Jews, and they're known as Mizrahi. They're not Sephardi, as some people would say, if you hadn't heard those words. Those are the Jews that fled from Spain, and they're not Ashkenazi Jews, who are the ones who left Russia or Eastern Europe. The Iraqi Jews mostly never left what was known as Babylonia, home to the Garden of Eden. Iraq was the home of the largest Jewish population in the Middle East. Over 250,000 Jews lived there. 40% of Baghdad was Jewish. Today there are none. The story is the same in all other Arab countries. Nearly all of the Jews are gone. About 900,000 in total. They've gone to America, to Canada, Britain, France, Argentina, and of course Israel. Israel, actually, unlike the Arabs who let their Palestinians rot in refugee camps for political and true genocidal purposes, Israel resettled their Jews and made them integral parts of the country. My mother was one of them, and we just celebrated her 90th birthday. I grew up hearing stories from my parents and other relatives that are in the book. They had an idyllic life. They lived and ate very well. My mother told of eating the fresh fruit of the date, the fig, and the pomegranate trees that grew on their property. The food was prepared fresh daily, and someone would milk a cow at their doorstep each morning and deliver fresh yogurt, which they called lebanon, and that every morning as well. I don't know where it came from, but ice was also delivered every day. Until she passed away at the age 100, my grandmother still called a refrigerator an icebox. Fresh fruit was available at the souk, where the Jewish women would cover their heads and wear something black and long so they could interact with the Arab men at the market. The servants prepared fresh bread, which is called pita, every day. Pita. Someone would bring the water from the Tigris River in a goat skin, and they filtered it through cheesecloth and sand for drinking and cooking. Our families lived in big houses on the banks of the Tigris. When the king and the entourage came to Baghdad, they sometimes stayed with the Jewish families because they had big houses there. Since the extended families often lived next to one another in adjacent buildings, the cousins were like brothers and sisters to one another. They ate together big meals up on the rooftop of their houses where they would go to escape the heat. In the summer, they often slept on the roof as well, and they enjoyed the breeze coming off the Tigris River. There were scents of spices like turmeric, which grew on the riverbanks. The Jews are known as the people of the book. They were the educated people, and they were the doctors, the judges, the bankers, and businessmen. The Arabs there were mostly illiterate. those who attended school mostly spent their time memorizing the Quran. The kings of Iraq needed the Jews to run the affairs of government. So they were the clerks and government officials. Jews went to school 6 days a week, taking only Shabbat, Saturday, off. They learned 4 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, French, and English. In fact, because I understood Arabic, my grandmother on my mother's side came to this country late, and she never learned English. Arabic was my first language. So my parents would speak French with one another so that we wouldn't know what they were saying. Of course, we picked up French also. Jews also often educated their daughters, something which was very unusual back in those times. As a result of education and influence, Jews often became quite wealthy. My grandfather went to Germany after World War I, and he bought diesel generators. He strung up copper wires throughout southern Iraq and became a private utility company, basically. It was the electrical generating company, and they paid taxes to the king. But things got bad after World War II, and the Arabs nationalized the businesses there. As it turned out, they didn't know how to run the power plant, and they cut the copper wires and sold them to scrap. And from the 1940s till the early 70s, southern Iraq did not have electricity. With the rise of Hitler, vile, really nasty anti-Semitism took place. We've all seen pictures of Hitler with the Grand Mufti of Baghdad. It culminated with the Farhud, which is a pogrom that took place over just 2 days in June of 1941. It's 1941 is 7 years before Israel was established. So it's not the presence of Israel or its existence as a state that motivated their anti-Semitism and desire to kill, sadly. Over 1,200 Jews were murdered and maimed in 2 days. They were killed with swords and axes and shovels. Women and babies suffered indescribable barbarity. The horrors that we saw on October 7th, sadly, are really nothing new. It's the way the Muslims have often behaved towards Jews and other infidels since time immemorial. And the British Army stood down and watched and allowed it to happen. The once idyllic life ended quickly, and the Jews had to flee for their lives. They were lucky if they could get a visa and just leave, as they were not allowed to sell any of their property or take anything with them. My grandmother was among those who stayed too long. Her family owned lots of property, rental properties, and they also ran a taxi business. They rented cars to the Arabs who paid weekly to lease the vehicles. And when my father came to America to study engineering at Johns Hopkins, he and his brother bought cars, used cars, a particular type of Chevy, a particular model that was, and they had them painted yellow, and they shipped them from the port of Baltimore to Iraq. And that's how they ran their taxi business back home. My grandfather had already died, so my grandmother consolidated what she had and tried to smuggle herself into Iraq, out of Iraq, into Iran in the trunk of a car. She had bought gold chains, which she had wrapped and hidden on her body. But when they crossed the border into Iran, her driver turned her in, and she was taken to prison. For 2 years, my father and his brothers didn't know anything about her well-being. America didn't have diplomatic relations with Iraq. Senator Clifford Case of New Jersey, who was the last Republican senator from New Jersey, was able to make contact through the Swiss embassy and learn that she was alive and could be released if a ransom was paid. Money changed hands. I don't know the details, but after 2 years in captivity, my grandmother was released. I was about 10 years old, and I had never met her before. She was remarkably well and in good health. Until she passed away at age 100, not long ago, she was optimistic and loved to laugh. She told a story of how she was able to stay alive in the Arab women's prison by befriending the female warden. Arabs were often quite superstitious, and they believed in fortune telling. My grandmother was able to convince the warden that she knew how to tell fortunes by looking at the sediment that collected at the bottom of the Turkish coffee cups. Every day the Lord would bring her in to read her fortune. And so she would look seriously at the lines in the woman's hand and compare them with the lines of sediment at the bottom of the Turkish coffee and tell her her fortune. And as a result, she was a very valued prisoner, taken care of very well. She was even able to help other of the captives there to be taken care of, well taken care of as well. When she came to this country, she told me the story, and I asked her if she really knew how to tell fortunes. And she impishly looked at me and said in Arabic, "Mahandik shafal," which loosely translated means, you're freaking kidding? Freaking is part of it, actually, in Arabic. It's a very colorful word. It was the Jewish ingenuity that brought them the ability to have a wonderful life in Iraq, despite the prejudices. The loss to the Arab countries of their Jews was to their loss, and much to Israel's gain. Many of the important business leaders in Israel are of Iraqi, Mizrahi descent. And about half the country's population is from the greater Arab world. Memories of Eden tells a story when relations between Jews and Muslims were much better. We can only hope that we may see those days again. Thank you.